now everybody has a voice because technology has enabled that. Like,
Susan, thank you so much for chatting with me. I really do appreciate it.
of course, I'm just happy that you're interested.
I am. Not only because it's a great film, but I'm also a 90s kid. So, I'm watching this film. I'm like, I remember these names. I loved alt rock in the 90s. And I remember hearing these names come across the airwaves or not. Having friends saying, I got this I made this mix CD or something back when that was a thing, and of course I have to explain all that to my kids now, and explain pirate radio, which brings us back to 40 watts from nowhere.
Hmm.
But what an amazing story! This is an incredible story from start to finish. And what can we hear a little bit from you? Like what was made it so passionate? Why were you so passionate about the station?
I was passionate about it because, like you, if I'm reading between the lines here, you're a music fan, right?
Yeah.
Back then, there weren't a whole lot of things that you could do to learn about new music. You could go to the record store, you could go out to see bands that you'd never heard of before, you could turn on the radio. But inevitably, when you turned on the radio, especially to a commercial station, it was not great. That's to be kind, right? So there was a ton of great music that was being recorded and put out, but it just wasn't getting through. And so that was why I decided that I should take matters into my own hands and build this transmitter and start broadcasting.
I feel like, and I could be wrong on this, but I feel like the 90s as a decade was one of those ones where it was breaking through. Like the independent scene was really breaking through, not just in music, but film as well. Like films like Pulp Fiction started getting, they were indie movies at the beginning. Um, but with the station, what were those days like? What were those days like being involved in that? Because we hear these incredible stories of the people that worked there and just how much they loved it, and the stresses, of course, of having young people dealing with or breaking all your stuff along the way. but
Yeah.
but what was it like being part of those days and helping contribute in the music scene?
Well, for me, it was like all the action literally came in through my door.
Mm.
So I moved to Los Angeles in 1995. I didn't know a soul. I had this radio station that I started up in the Bay Area and I brought it with me. And I just got connected up with the whole Silver Lake music scene. If you've never been to Los Angeles, you probably don't know how massive it is.
Yeah.
And I wanted to set up in a totally different part of town. I wanted to be at Venice Beach, but somebody who I was in touch with who lived down here said, "Oh, no, no, Silver Lake is the place to be." I came down, found a place in Silver Lake. I was like, what are you talking about? It was like pre-gentrification. Everything was like auto repair shops, broken glass window places, things like that, like super basic fast food chains. But it was where all the artists and the musicians were living because it was dirt cheap. So it was basically the whole musical scene of that area came through my doors to either DJ, to, talk to their friends about music, play the music that they wanted to hear, talk about the bands that they were going to see. We were getting free ticket giveaways from the local clubs. It just sort of spiraled because people, it sort of like filled a void. When you had the club saying, "Hey, we'll help you give away tickets," and the people that were coming in to spin records were playing some of their bands, but also the music that they just wanted to hear, whether it was a national act that wasn't getting a lot of attention. But it felt very much like a community center sort of vibe, but a cool but a cool community center.
Well, that's the sense I get from this film, is that this is a place where people sort of went to feel safe, feel free. And there's something so beautiful about that. And it's funny, nowadays, that we hear from this generation, the search for authenticity. And I remember being a teen in the 90s, and that we I don't know if we used that word, but it was that sense, right? This is pure. This is who we
Yeah.
are, you
Yes,
know?
exactly. Just freedom of expression. I had no rules, and sometimes that came back to bite me in the ass. Because some people didn't necessarily respect that this was my house that I was running this radio station out of. But yeah, I just think it was people being authentically who they were and playing the music that they wanted to hear and that they were totally into. And I was just shocked that there were hundreds of people who had such deep understanding of whole genres and record collections to back it up, which is amazing to me still to this day.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that was what I wanted to ask you too, is how did you know that KBLT, am I saying it
Yeah,
right? Yeah,
yeah, you are.
KBLT was making an impact because this is like you said, a community center in the best of ways, but the community's responding. This isn't just about the people coming in, it's the people receiving it, and this is sort of home to them too.
So how did I know that it was having an impact? Just the
Yeah.
sheer number of people who wanted to be involved. And it kind of started with this locus of people in that very specific geographic area. But then it became like bands from the UK were stopping in, like Spiritualized and Jesus and Mary Chain and John Spencer Blues Explosion and the Flaming Lips. Like they all sort of made a pit stop at the station. So that to me felt like we were filling a void. I think when I would go shopping locally and like go into a place and they'd be playing it on the radio, that seemed to be making an impact. I mean, the more obvious thing is probably just your classic media attention when you start to get, written up in the local papers and then Rolling Stone, which is what happened with us. So those are the ways that made me feel like it was making a difference. You could also argue that was it making a difference or was it just because it was cool? There's something also
Mm.
about the mystique of doing something completely illegally and the romanticism of, fighting the law, you know, to just play great music.
I love that you hit on there because I feel like, and maybe forgive me, like you, if the question is too out there, bear with me, but I feel like there's a relationship between technology and change.
Yeah.
And when technology breaks through, we see different ways that people find it to express themselves in this way. Like this was, the what was happening in the 90s with not just with KBLT, but across the board, technology was changing the way we consume. But I was wondering if you see that relationship and what it means to you.
Well, I feel like none of us knew at the time that this was sort of the end of the analog era, that we were like right on the cusp of digital and no turning back, right? So this is like one of the oldest forms of media, like a classic radio station. You've got a transmitter, you've got an antenna, you send out the signal versus sitting at a computer and finding music that way, and the internet radio stations that started to sort of come up and all the digital music services like Napster, I mean, that was all happening at that same time. And we really literally had no idea what that was going to lead to. Spotify, so in a Spotify era, it feels like all the trouble that I went to with the DJs to spread the gospel of good music. It's like now it's just at your fingertips and there's an algorithm telling you what it is that you probably are going to like, right? But at the time, it was hand curated, it was people's personal passions, and they were, picking it out and playing it for you.
But you see, this is what I wondered. I wondered in your mind where we see that echoing today, because I mean, let's be honest, this is not sponsored by Amazon. This conversation here, we're not on a network, we're on YouTube and podcast areas, and people are fighting the battling the TikTok ban, if you will, that was big in the news recently. But in some ways, do you see a connection with the spirit now that you had then?
I 100% do. I mean, now everybody has a voice. because technology has enabled that. Like you're able to do your show, you're able to
Mhm.
have like YouTube, the great enabler, right? It's TikTok, like any of the influencer video platforms. I definitely see a line. The technology just didn't exist back then. And so I use this old form of technology. You're using the new form of technology, but I totally think it's the same thing. Like you feel like you have something to say, right? You feel like you have a unique perspective that you want to be able to share with the world, and you're doing it and you can. So I think that's amazing.
Yeah, this is what I think too. Like, I think I like the fact you say everybody has something to say. Everybody has a voice now. Not everybody's being heard, but everybody is yelling out into the wind. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
To be heard, and I think that's so interesting. And I remember in it like in the '90s, the idea that you and I would be sitting across on this laptop having this conversation would be science fiction. It was something you'd see in a movie. We'd be video chatting or what have you. But there was that spirit with KBLT that was like, we need to be heard,
Mhm.
and we need to find a way to make that happen. And I love that about this story and about the film.
Don't you think that that's just a natural human instinct to want to be heard, to want to be seen, to want to be recognized,
Yeah.
to be real, like to be authentically you? That's what I think it was.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, again, I'm gonna as a question, if this is a little out there, feel free to say no, I don't want to answer that. But one of the lines in the film that I really connected with is that freedom is slowly diminishing,
Generic character.
and I was wondering how you felt about that in today's culture.
Well, the reason why, the editor and I gravitated toward him saying that, the DJ who said that, is that was 1998. And it feels like something that needs to be said right now. Like this idea that you don't really have freedom, that it's as much as technology has given you a voice, it's kind of feeling like a scarier time where can you really pipe up and say what you need to say, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it it's a delicate balance. I mean, because you want to be heard, but there's just as many people that don't want to hear it,
Yeah.
or want to control it, if you will, at
Mhm.
the same time. It's I mean, in some ways it's a scary time.
Yeah. And what's funny is that back then it was the FCC that seemed like it
Mm.
was saying that we don't want to hear what you have to say. Now it feels like larger than that. So I don't know. It's still a thing out there in
Yeah,
the
yeah, absolutely. One of the other things I thought was wonderful, there's a key phrase in the film where they talk about the magic of creative innocence. And I was
Mhm.
wondering in your mind what that means and how it applies to KBLT.
Well, you were in your 20s once, as was I. Like you're sort of like tripping through life at that point. And I don't mean that in the psychedelic drug sense
No,
of the,
it's true. I understand what you mean. Yeah.
but just you don't really know what you're doing, right? So you're just trying stuff. And so I was one of the older people at the station. I was 28 when I started the station. A lot of the DJs were younger 20s. And I just feel like it was a space for them to be creative.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, creative innocence, just because you don't know what you're doing. So why not just try something, right? And that's so hard to do as you get older, you
Yeah.
know, to try something and let the chips fall. Maybe it worked, maybe it didn't, and you'll be able to pick yourself up and keep going. That doesn't feel so easy now. Life was also really cheap back then. So I feel like it was easier to sort of take a risk. For some reason, I'm thinking of this one DJ who was a performance artist. And she was doing one of her performances at a benefit show, which was basically rolling paint on her vagina and sitting down and then offering them up for sale. You know what I mean? Like that was sort of the era, right? And yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Uh, honestly, that almost sounds like the 60s. Like that I've often thought this the 90s were like the 60s, and I feel like the last 10 years are sort of pushing in on that same sort of uh, call for freedom, if you will.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, definitely. And 60s, I'm also just drawn to that as an era musically.
Mm.
Yeah, and aesthetically. So I like that you're picking up on that.
Well, I really felt that even at the time, and I remember there was a real conversation going on about what does it mean to speak? What does it
Hmm.
mean to be heard?
Hmm.
Like we've said. I would love to know too, from your perspective, what was it like in that time? Like there's a real change in here about when you notice when you're getting that notoriety. And you've got major bands like you said, Jesus and Mary Chain's coming in, and the Chili Peppers are coming in, and Flaming Lips, and they want to be on KBLT, which is this local radio show. So did that cause tension between like the indie vibe, or was it just sort of like, oh my gosh, they're actually here? Like what were those conversations like?
It's funny because when we were making the movie, there was a discussion about whether to even include the Red Hot Chili Peppers. People thought that that part should be smaller. It's 2 minutes in the entire film that they were
Yeah.
eating at the station. I didn't want to make that seem like that was the biggest thing that ever happened to us, but the discussion was who was providing more legitimacy to whom?
Mm.
Was it, the pirate radio station was providing more like indie cred to this band who was huge all around the world? Or was this big band giving more credibility to me, like this little upstart radio station? And the answer is it was both, right? Um, but considering that I didn't know what was going to happen when I started the radio station, never in my wildest dreams would I ever have imagined that the Red Hot Chili Peppers would be playing in a closet in my apartment or that any of these bands would be stopping by. Um, what was my point here? There's a change in your psyche. Like
Yeah.
like what are your goalposts for what the station should be? And at first it was just being on the air and like hanging out with my friends and playing records. And then eventually it gets to the point like, well, we want all the bands. We want everybody to stop. You just sort of become, I think I became a little bit more of like in egomaniac, and I just kind of wanted more and more. Like my aspirations got much larger than they were at the very beginning, which was kind of keep it small. So you're talking about tensions. Yes, there were some people who thought like, no, like I just want it to be small. And also because of the cool factor and a lot of people kind of getting involved who hadn't been there from the very beginning. Those people decided to leave, but I think more people were very excited that we grew this from scratch, as a community. So, but there was what you're talking about, like, why are we having these bands come in? Why not just have it be our friends and neighbors?
Yeah. Yeah. I was wondering too, like when things ended, when you got shut down, did other companies come in to fill that void, or was there a genuine sense of loss in the community?
I think, well, what's interesting about what happened with KBLT going under is like a huge group of the DJs went to an online radio station that had just started. And I believe that radio station still exists, Kill Radio. So I made the conscious decision not to do an online radio station. Some of the DJs had suggested that because it was just in its infancy. And I didn't love that idea because I'm a Luddite, first of all, and I'm a little bit more of somebody who likes to touch and feel and see. And like you could see the people in the community reacting and being involved at the station. I felt like you were trading that for like nameless people in far-flung parts of the world.
Right.
And that didn't necessarily appeal to me at that time. So,
Yeah.
and I also had just gotten a major job, and so it didn't make sense for me to try to pursue the internet radio station. I'm happy that a lot of these, like there's one station in particular that I'm thinking of. It was another pirate operating on the same frequency as us in Los Angeles that went totally legit. You know, they managed to get the low power FM license. They also have an internet radio station, and they still exist. Dub Lab started out as a station operating out of a dorm room, I think, at USC. Um, and here they are, like 30 years later, still doing their thing, but in a much more legitimized, professional way. So I feel like they're sort of what could have happened, but there's really only room for one of those. Like it couldn't have been, like we couldn't both have done that. So I'm happy that they did it because I had sort of gotten burnt out by the very end, and it wasn't the only thing that I was interested in doing. So,
You know, it's funny because it does, just hearing, like watching this film and remembering how time works, if you will, I forget how that was right on the cusp of the internet breakthrough. I remember Napster and all those sites were, when they first broke through, and it was like, oh, you can download this digital copy. And then there was the battle over CDs, and we see all these things. But yeah, that absolutely is wild to me because you're right. It's a huge change from the local community into a broader online community. And what does community mean
mhm.
uh, in that respect as well?
Yeah, and for me, community, I really felt like it was my found family. I was in my family, I'm from the Midwest, and I'd moved out to California, and I really felt like I had found my tribe. So
Mm.
for me, the radio station really did feel like a super extended family. And I guess you can feel that with the world if you're like Mr. Beast or something. You know what I mean? I don't know. I mean, you probably still have a ton of contact with your fans, but I think I'm just somebody who likes to be able to touch and feel and see,
Yeah,
real humans. So,
absolutely, absolutely. Honestly, Susan, this film is great. It's so wonderful. What do you hope people take away from 40 Watts to Nowhere?
well, I hope that they learn something that they didn't know existed, that there was this whole movement in the 90s across the country, how important radio was at that time. I also feel like, we could have left on a really sad note. I did not want people to feel sad. I didn't want them to be coming out of the theater like crying because it was over. I wanted people to feel like they had been on a ride, like they had had the highs and lows. They had lived in my shoes for a minute of what it was like to do this. And then I wanted them to feel like, do it. You know what I mean? Like, here's the torch. Like, if you're inspired to do anything that seems radical or scary to you, just try it. That's really the feeling that I want people to have. I want people to feel inspired, empowered, you know, just pursue your craziest, biggest idea and see what happens.
I love that. I love that. I love that so much. Honestly, Susan, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Congratulations on the film. It's great. It's really special.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Have a great day.
You too.